Stranger Things. Even if you've never watched it, you have most certainly heard of it. If you haven't, well, this video probably won't make quite as much sense to you, but I have tried to write it in a way that anyone would still be able to understand the point I'm trying to make in this video and how this show really portrays trauma well. I will be talking about much of the show in like loose terms and plot points from seasons past, so if you care about spoilers, there's your spoiler warning. If you don't, let's get into the video. If you're unfamiliar with it, Stranger Things is a Netflix show set in the 1980s, which follows a group of kids from small town of Hawkins, Indiana, who stumble headfirst into a world of government secrets, child experiments, and an alternate dimension. Over the course of the series, both its characters and tone have matured and grown, aside from just in age and season number. I mean, seeing a terrifying creature pop through the wall of your house would be enough to give me nightmares, forever. But events such as Nancy struggling with guilt over the death of her best friend, and Will dealing with PTSD from being stuck in the Upside Down and, being possessed by the shadow monster, and, even Joyce seeing her boyfriend being eaten alive in front of her are all things that would cause much more permanent damage. However, we never really saw much of the aftermath being dealt with on screen, besides Joyce and Nancy being sad at certain points and Will dramatically touching his neck. But this aftermath is something I really wanted to see from the show for a while, especially after season 3 released. It made me want to see it from the show even more. Billy's sacrifice in the final episode really cemented my feeling that if this show wanted to continue to grow and evolve, it had to allow the characters to begin to deal with and unravel their trauma and to be human. We all have something in our lives that haunts us in one way or the other, and for us, the audience, seeing these characters be vulnerable in a new way would be an excellent way to get people reinvested in the show. So, what did the showrunners do for the 4th season? They literally created and crafted an entire villain around the power of preying on people's traumas and vulnerabilities, and did it make for a fantastic season.
Your suffering is almost at an end.
In the opening scene of episode 1, it was very clear the tone of season 4 would be much darker than any season before it. And this tone shift mainly comes from that of the new villain, Vecna, a humanoid creature from the Upside Down who preys on the mind. Shifting away from the formless villains of the last 2 seasons was definitely the best choice here because it creates a much more real presence on screen than the shadow monster did in the last 2 seasons. And, having someone physically there on set really helps the actors too, and that comes across in their performances. So I don't want to entirely spoil his backstory here, so I'll leave that aside for now. But the story choice of having Vecna be someone who preys on an individual's trauma was a phenomenal one, and it immediately creates a sense of shared trauma with all of the characters, even ones we don't know, like this season's new introductions. Chrissy is one of the popular kids in high school. She's dating one of the top football players and is a cheerleader. Unfortunately, Chrissy doesn't stay around for long, but throughout the first episode, we get a glimpse of Vecna through her as he mentally attacks Chrissy with a barrage of memories of the abuse she endured from her mom, presumably relating to her performance in school and her eating disorder. In episode 2, we see even more of Vecna's power, as another new character, Freddy, is bombarded with guilt from his past in a car crash he was in. All of this is us finding out, along with the main characters, that this new creature is attacking others in their mind and is indeed from the Upside Down. Now, these may have been 2 characters that we didn't get a lot of time with, but what their introduction and deaths did do was serve as an extremely effective way to show us both the power Vecna holds and the pain he can have on someone's mind and body. He slowly tortures their mind and then overwhelms them with fear and the ticking of their own demise. After the first 2 episodes, we are well acquainted with the manner in which he strikes. So, when we get to this scene at the end of episode 3, we know what is in store for our favorite red-headed skateboarder and Dig Dug master, bringing us to what is not only quite possibly the best episode of Stranger Things, but a phenomenal visual illustration for trauma and what it takes to overcome it. After her initial encounter with Vecna's clock, we see the Hawkins gang begin to uncover Vecna's history in order to save Max. Because as it turns out, the clock signals a 24-hour countdown until Vecna's curse is fully unleashed. At this point, all they really know is that Vecna preys on the mind and an individual's trauma, making Max a prime subject. As the episode progresses, Max is seemingly the only one not completely worrying and freaking out that she has like 24 hours to live if they don't figure out how to break the curse. Because even with her impending death, Max decides to keep her mask on for the sake of her friends, as she's been doing throughout these 4 episodes so far. She goes as far as to write letters to each of her friends as a failsafe, so that if they fail to stop Vecna, she would be able to say all the things she wishes she could, but hasn't been able to, including ones for her dead brother, Billy.
Dear Billy, I don't know if you can even hear this. 2 years ago, I would have said that's ridiculous, impossible. But that was before I found out about alternate dimensions and monsters, so...
The moment where Max reads her letter to her brother's grave is pivotal for her, because it is the first time since his death that she has been able to completely be honest with herself. We have seen that she's been pulling away from her friends and seen her pushing down her feelings this whole time, even with like her school counselor, denying that she is struggling, which is something that those of us who either have or still do deal with the effects of trauma or grief or any of the things along those lines know all too well. We see that her friends are trying to reach out, trying to pull her back, but she believes the lie that she's better off alone. She believes that alone, no one else she loves can get hurt, and that she doesn't need anyone, and most importantly, she believes she deserves the pain she has been in. And it is here at Billy's gravesite that Max, for the first time, fully expresses her grief and how she's been unable to move on. How she's walked around with this inside her for so long, how one of the hardest parts of losing him has not been able to tell people how in his final moments, Billy was a hero. That despite his flaws and terrible treatment of her, he sacrificed himself for her and her friends. So it makes sense that she has such conflicting emotions about his death. Because while, yes, he was terrible to her, and yes, he wasn't the greatest brother of all time, he was still family, and he still, in his last moments, chose her over himself. All her bottled up thoughts and feelings and raw grief comes out in this moment of true human vulnerability.
I think that maybe a part of me died that day, too. And I haven't told anyone this. I just can't.
And it is in this moment that the lies come in. And it's in this moment that Vecna strikes, twisting her words and her grief right back at her.
You know, I think there's a part of you buried somewhere deep that wanted me to die that day.
It's not true.
You belong here.
From all of Vecna's lines to Max in this episode, that line stuck out the most to me. I haven't dealt with trauma or grief in the ways that Max has, certainly, but as someone who daily struggles with depression, this is a sentiment I heavily relate to. Too often I can find myself believing that I deserve to be the way I'm feeling. I deserve to be left alone, that those who care about me aren't even there. Despite her efforts to fight him off initially, Max falls to Vecna's tricks and is captured by him. Yet even in her captured state, she still is trying to fight back.
You're not really here.
Oh, but I am Max. I am.
She realizes this villain, this very real being haunting her with her traumas and fears, is not simply something that can be dealt with or ignored. She must choose to fight it. Just as Vecna begins to enact the final phase of his curse, while her friends are fighting for her in the only 80s way possible, Max does the one thing she can against an enemy who is in her mind. She chooses to remember. to remember what is true and to fight back with those memories. She chooses to fight the lies, to fight the false narrative that both Vecna and her own mind have written. She calls upon her mind to remember the truth, that even in her hurt and her unseen pain, she isn't alone, and she never has been. Her friends have been there this whole time. In this moment, Max made the choice that all of us face every day. The choice to live, no matter how hard it is. For those of us who are in a mental war of our own, whether it's against grief, trauma, depression, anxiety, or anything else, the best and absolute hardest thing we can do is to instead run up that massive, impossible hill towards the people in our lives who care about us and towards those memories. And that choice wasn't a one-time one. It was one she had to continue to make over and over every day forward. And that is something that I believe we can all learn from. Keep running up that hill, no matter how impossible it may seem.
I thought we lost you. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here.